Happy Sunday, everybody. I'm Dr. Bill, and it's time for another episode of Beyond Limits, where spirit meets science. So today's topic is the power of 8, talking about cycles, alignment, and transformation. So again, welcome everybody here. I'll get into the topic here in just a moment, but I also want to tie that into my book launch, my first book that launched earlier this week, that's titled Divine Whispers, Poems of Love and Spirit. And I'll talk about how that ties into our Power of 8 story here, and then also some significance about the numerology of that and about turning points in our life. So if you think about it, life is filled with turning points, right? You've had many of them in your own lives. Moments that may seem ordinary at the time, but hold the seeds of great transformation. Many times we don't even see what those are at the time. It happens after the fact where we look back on our lives and we say, oh yeah, that was a major turning point for me. But today we're going to talk about this power of 8, and it's about recognizing cycles and alignment and the infinite potential to grow and heal and live in harmony with both the spiritual and practical sides of life. And that's kind of the overall message of what I want to jump into today. But when you leave the episode today, you'll leave away with some understanding of alignment moments, what those are, and it's not just about some rare cosmic date or something like that. And also we'll get you to kind of deep dive within your own experiences to see what your moments are in terms of power of 8 moments, so to speak, and what opportunities are there for transformation or maybe to come into your lives in the near future. And then we'll talk about the connection of this between resilience and spiritual growth and creative expression. But let's set the stage first with the numerology, which is kind of interesting. And then I do have a story to share of my own spiritual journey and how that got started and how it's tied to that. But if you look at classical numerology, the meaning of 8 is all about transformation, abundance, balance, and infinity. In fact, if you drop the number 8 on its side, it's the infinity symbol, right? I think everybody pretty much knows that. In my case, for sharing the story about what happened on August 8th, 1988, which I'll get into in a moment, that was an amplified energy, an amplified alignment and manifestation, because it's also known in some circles here as the Lion's Gate portal, because it has to do with the constellation Leo, and where it is in the sky. And it's supposed to be a portal for opening up alignment and that sort of thing. So to have triple 8 or quadruple 8 in my case, that really amplified the energy. And looking back in retrospect, I can say that was true. So what's the science behind that? I don't know, but there's something powerful about it, and you'll understand as I share my story. Also, how do these concepts intersect with our own personal philosophy? Okay, and with me, it's about where spirit meets science. So on this date, on August 8th, 1988, that's when spirit, or you could say science, finally met spirit, so to speak, in my own personal journey. And it was a pretty powerful day that day, unbeknownst to me, but I think it's important to kind of put it in context of what was going on in my life, and then you'll understand how such a pivotal moment like that changed my whole direction and what I was going to do. So if I go back to 1988, I was living in Atlanta, Georgia, and I was actually working in the restaurant business at the time. I was actually on the team that started Pizza Hut Delivery. Atlanta was the first market when Pizza Hut Delivery started before it spread across the U.S. But that we were the first market to do that. We launched it. So it was a pretty stressful sort of experience. And I had my own restaurant there that I was running at the time, but I wasn't satisfied in my life. And so there's a number of things that were trigger events that happened that led me to this 8888. And I won't get into all those details, it'll take too long, but when I look back at it, something was clearly pushing me in this direction. And it was in July of '88. I was on vacation, taking a break from a long-needed vacation, and I was at Disney World in Florida. And I remember, if you've ever been there in the Epcot Center and you've been to, I don't know if they have the same setup anymore. Honestly, I haven't been there in years, but there was something called the Living Seas. It was all about the ocean stuff. And I was always fascinated with the ocean. As a boy, watching Jacques Cousteau and all that kind of stuff. And I learned to scuba dive very early as a teenager, and then and ended up being what I did in my graduate work, as it turns out, which you'll find out in a minute. But as it turns out, I had kind of reached this plateau in your life. So maybe you've had these moments where you kind of hit the wall, and it's like it doesn't seem like your life is going to, but you feel unfulfilled. It's not what you're supposed to be doing. And I think we've all had those moments, but a lot of times maybe we don't recognize those in that moment. So at that time I decided, it's funny because I watched an Oprah Winfrey show, first one I'd ever seen. And in fact, it was probably when she got started. It was one of the earliest episodes. Maybe I have this conversation with Oprah one day, but I still remember the show because the guests that she had on for that day were all people that had terminal illnesses that knew they were going to die in a matter of months. And they were all living their lives to the fullest. They weren't going to leave anything to chance. They were just going to go do it. And that's a powerful message, because it kind of was a light bulb for me and said, hey, Bill, what are you doing with your life? You're not dying. At this time, I'm 29 years old. It's like, and I'm contemplating, what am I doing with my life? So that kind of sparked my interest again about the ocean. And I started out to go to school 10 years previously to go to FIT, for Florida Institute of Technology, for study marine biology. And this is something I wanted to do. And so I came back to Atlanta, I looked up all the schools that I wanted to go to, and I kind of ruled them all off. And then one of those check boxes was the University of California at Santa Cruz in Northern California, in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I decided, and I had never traveled past Atlanta West, really. Okay, I'd never been anywhere else in the U.S. at this time. And so I was going to make a trip to California, and it turned out that lifelong friends of our family had just moved there to the area, in San Jose area. And so I called them up and I said, hey, I want to come out and check out UC Santa Cruz. And so I did. I flew. I'd never done a flight like that, a long distance like that, and flew out there, stayed with them for a few days, and then I went to the campus. I set up a call ahead of time. Again, keep in mind, guys, we didn't have cell phones. Internet was not huge at this point, so it was the old school way of making phone calls, that sort of thing, leaving messages and talking to people. There were no emails. And so I did call up, and I talked to one of the professors there who was there in the summer. So obviously it was during the summer. His school was out of session. But they invited me to the campus, and I went up there, and I fell in love with the campus. And this is in early August of '88. And I decided, after I had that session up on the campus, got a tour of the library, everything, I said, this is where I'm going to school. So I made a decision at that point that this is where I went to school. Now, I had completed 1 year of community college, and I had some other credits from another university, but I had dropped out of school for a while and wasn't continuing with that. And so I decided, no, I need to, this is really where I want to go to school. I loved the program. It was affordable. It was, back then, UC University of California was actually affordable to go to school. And so I said, no, let's go do that. And I was so convinced, now this is the key point here, that on August 8th, 1988, I went and got to the local DMV and got my California driver's license, because I wanted to establish 1 year residency to start attending in the fall of '89. So I was so convinced that I was going to move, 3,000 miles across the country with no job, no prospect of anything. Already had a job, and other things that kept me in Atlanta, and I was going to just leave all of that and go to school. Well, this is what these pivotal turning point moments are, because they bring you into alignment, but only if you're really in tune with that. I had already been dissatisfied, and remember, I had just a couple weeks before went to Disney World and saw rekindled my passion for marine biology in the ocean. So this is what really got me to go to UC Santa Cruz. And so I came back, but that day that I got it, at the time, it seemed like the best thing to do. And I even remember thinking about it. It's like, am I going to do this? And it wasn't even a second thought. I just went ahead and pulled the trigger and did it. That was a major decision, a major life-changing decision, because I'm going to do this. It means I'm committing myself to this path, not even having all my ducks in a row in terms of how I was going to do that, how I was going to afford to do it, how was I going to move there, all of that. So, looking back on that day, and actually the day that I got the driver's license, I remember noting that it was 8/8/88. Of course, I didn't know anything about numerology at this time, and I hadn't even really dove into my spiritual path in a conscious way. So I had no idea the significance of that at the time. But I felt it. And it was the decision that I made at that time that made me move into taking that journey. And so this is what happens to us in our lives, right? We have this feeling or thinking that our life is going to change, right, at some point. And the fact that I even remember the day is because it was, it was a coincidence that it was 8/8/88, and I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. I didn't plan it that way, of course. But when you look back at it and understanding numerology, well, there's got to be something to that, because it certainly was a significant change, and it certainly was a realignment to my path of following my passion, right? So there are a lot of lessons that are learned in hindsight from that. But at the time, I had no idea where it was going to lead me. And so I won't go through the rest of the story, but then this was like, the branches in a tree, and suddenly I'm taking off on this branch, and this is where I'm supposed to go. I knew ultimately I just wanted to go to school there, and that was it. But a lot of things happened along the path that led me to where I am today, which is kind of a fascinating story. So we'll save that for another book sometime down the road. So let's pivot a little bit here and talk about cycles and alignment, right? And maybe you're in this situation in your life where you're in a certain pattern, you feel like a certain routine or cycle. And sometimes there are changes that need to happen for us that will lead us to growth within ourselves personally and spiritually. And a lot of times we resist that. So it's kind of like being on a merry-go-round, and you're going around, and if you remember being on one of those and you're looking, you come back around, you see the same point again, you see like your friend or your parent or somebody watching you on the merry-go-round, you wave at that moment, right? Well, this is about jumping off the merry-go-round at those key points to take you into a new path, right? And so we have these patterns in our life and cycles, and they're signs of alignment moments in all of our lives, all the time. There's that. So some of them are big, and again, you don't realize that at the time how big they are. But if you're working on your spiritual practice and feeling this innate connection to something that needs to change energetically, you're probably coming up on an alignment moment or in your cycle of where you're supposed to go to next, okay? And the importance of that is just being aware that that's actually happening. That's first. Secondly is being open to change and realignment, and then taking some intentional action when those moments arrive. So how do you identify those moments? If you think about it, how do you identify those moments and those cycles? Well, it can be challenging, especially if you're kind of asleep at the wheel and you're just not looking out from the merry-go-round and you're just going around in your routine or whatever you're doing. So Again, as part of it is developing a spiritual practice through meditation and prayer, whatever works for you, and really getting connected within yourself and talking to that still small voice within you that does that. Because then those spiritual breadcrumbs, I like to call them, will appear, and you'll say, okay, you're going around a merry-go-round. Oh, yep, there's one. I need to jump off here and follow that. You don't have to know ultimately where it's going. Yes, you should set some goals. We talk about goal setting in business and our personal lives, that sort of thing. But we may do that, but we're not really following our passion. So for me, somehow I ended up through the 80s in Atlanta working in the restaurant business, and I had a successful career with that. I was actually a very young manager, and I opened all their new restaurants in the chain all over the state of Georgia. So I was in this mode of doing that. I was into business and running a business and so on, and hiring people and having teams up to 50 people, when I'm 20-something years old managing. So I don't know many 20-somethings today that are doing that, but that's where I was at the time. But it didn't feel like I wasn't following my passion, which is the whole point of this. So and we're going to talk about this in my upcoming book, The 5 Keys to Unlocking Your Spiritual Awakening. It's also going to be my upcoming TEDx talk, so stay tuned for news about that. However, one of those keys in there is passion. Okay, and so I had this passion from the time I was a boy to get connected with marine biology and the ocean, and that's what I wanted to really do, but I got sidetracked from that. I went down the wrong path. And nothing's wasted, by the way, so don't feel like, oh no, I shouldn't have done that for the last 10 years. Well, I could think that way because that's where I was. But the reality is there was a lot of learning experiences from that. Everything you do as an experience is something you can build on in your life, right? And I think the other piece of this is being open. A lot of people really don't want to be open because they don't want to move into change. They don't want things to change. And if there's any universal constant in the universe, is that things change. They always will. So why not have them change for where you want to go to follow your passion or whatever it is that you love to do, and make it intentional when you take action on that inspired action, when you see those spiritual breadcrumbs. That's what you want to do. So from that turning point led me down the path to not just my professional career, to get my PhD in chemistry, which happened all there some years later, but also it started me down the path for my spiritual journey, because it was in a few years. I started journaling around this time and started writing about my experience and stuff like that. The spiritual awakening that I had that was really profound, that I've mentioned before, happened around the year 2000. And so then that accelerated my writing, that sort of thing. And then I was starting to write, it was like 2008, so another 8 here, by the way, alignment. If you want to add another alignment piece here. Something happened in early 2008 that led me on the path to go away. It was in May of 88. To go away and start writing my first book. And at that time, I thought there was only one book I had in mind to write. And I'd been journaling for a few years after that. And by the way, I hadn't even started writing poetry at this stage, okay? That came a few months after this. But what happened was I went away to, a place to write at a cabin for a few days. And this was, I was living in Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas at this time now. And I went away to go do that. Well, that started me on the path to start actually writing my books. And I did start writing that one book. Now I have 4 that I've been working on. And of course, poetry just kind of happened by chance. I was taking a class or something and studying spiritual teaching and stuff like that for Centers for Spiritual Living. And I was doing that, and one of our exercises was to do a report or something creative or whatever. And as I was meditating to do that, that's when the first poem came to me to start writing. And I'd never written poetry before. So how does that happen? I mean, think about it. How does that creative energy for that happen? Well, because there was a connection now for a few years with the other side, the spiritual side of myself and my spiritual journey, that allowed that creative energy to just flow through me from the divine. And that's why I call my book Divine Whispers. And that's what started me writing poetry. And then I did that for the next 15 years, which takes us up to last year, 2024. And actually, I wrote the last 2 poems in the book last year. It was based on some experiences a little over a year ago. And so, but I kept thinking, I need to publish this, and I didn't get around to doing that for whatever reason. I did feel like the book was ready to be published. I felt like there was more poetry to write. Now, will I write more poetry? Probably. Maybe there'll be a second edition of the book, but that's not really my focus at the moment. I'm focused on finishing the other books and preparing for that. But every now and then a poem will probably sneak in. I don't plan it out. It just happens based on what's happening in different moments of my journey. So interestingly, I had talked even about publishing this in June this year, and I kind of put it off. I got busy with the business. I was doing that, and I didn't do it until I finally had some time over the weekend, last weekend or so, and then I decided, let's get this published. It takes a lot to get a book published, and formatting and all that, and then I ended up submitting it to Amazon on August 8th, 2025. So on the 37th anniversary of that big turning point I had. Now I made this connection when I looked at the date. Again, not thinking about the date, but it got published on that. So there's significant meaning to that for me because of my spiritual journey. It's almost like closing the loop on one part of my spiritual journey, which was my poetry writing, which are all poems of love and inspiration or spirit. Okay, so that again, and it shares a lot of my spiritual journey in these different poems. Now, my other books are quite different. For example, the second one that'll be coming out before the end of the year, I hope, will be The 5 Keys to Unlocking Your Spiritual Awakening. And that idea for that book birthed from that weekend I went to the cabin in 2008. And so I've been sitting with that for a long time. I've done actually public speaking on this. I did a workshop on it. And then it's also going to be the framework for the TED Talk. So it's kind of exciting to have that because it felt like when that was inspired, there'll be a story about that when I release that book. I'll tell you about that. And then there's 2 others that I won't get into, but you can visit my website at drbillclark.life for more information. You can see what's coming over the next couple of years, I'd say. We'll get these out the door. The books are in various stages, so to speak. Now, so let me just share one poem that's tied into our theme today, and you get a preview of that, because it has to do with a spiritual practice to move into alignment. And to do that, many times, we have to let go of something that no longer serves us. It energetically doesn't fit anymore. And so we're going through this process of letting go. And I would say, as you dive fully into your spiritual journey in your life, as you move through that, you will find that you'll be letting go of a lot of things that don't serve you anymore. And so this is kind of where this poem came from. I'm not sure when I wrote this. It was some years ago, but for sure it's aligned with our topic today. So let me read that poem to you, and then we'll sit with that for a few minutes. It's called The Art of Letting Go. Letting go of drama, letting go of expectations, letting go of control and all unsettling sensations. Letting go of what no longer serves, letting go of fear, letting go of frustration, knowing that Spirit's presence is near. Letting go of judgments, letting go of stories, letting go of guilt. There really are no worries. Letting go of false beliefs, letting go of sin, letting go of lost love, finding that still, small voice within. Forgiving all the past, filling our hearts with love, forgiving ourselves most of all, trusting in the process above. Taking a path with heart, movement fluid with grace, knowing we are never alone, embracing this peaceful space. For we are this divine presence, not this illusion we see, that seeks only our good in this life and remembers to just be. Letting go, the art of letting go. And I'm sure you can distill from all of that the journey you take when you're moving through your different cycles and periods of alignment in your life. You probably had many of them. And so, please go get my book. Please write a review. It'd be great to have that. Excitingly, I've actually been approached by a couple publishers since it got published. I didn't even do a press release on this, and that's kind of exciting. Somehow people find these things. I don't know, especially with AI technology today. Probably they search and find things, but there's exciting things ahead from the books that are coming and speaking engagements from that as well. So please go get my book on drbillclark.life and share the journey with me. I'm sure there'll be something that'll resonate with you. So let's move into now the lessons from the Power of Eight. Okay, what are some key principles that we can apply in our own lives, which you can apply in your life? So first thing is something I already mentioned, is about looking for patterns and symbolic moments in your journey. And so maybe it's taking some quiet time, reflecting upon where you are in your journey, thinking about what you're passionate about, and it's a contemplation, right? And from that will probably emerge some patterns, or you may identify some things that need to change or things that need to be let go of. Like I described numerous things to let go of. Whatever it is, you'll identify that in that moment as you move into that space, and really be honest with yourself, listen to that inner voice, and look for those patterns and symbolic moments in your journey. And wherever you're sitting, there's probably something that needs to be let go of to move back into realignment. And the fact, if you're watching this episode or you're hearing me saying this, you probably already know what that is. The second thing is we want to embrace these cycles of challenge and renewal. So, right, we can't be afraid with that. We move into them with faith, okay, and a place of coming from love. So we know that if there is a change that has to happen, no matter how big it is, and I've had some big ones in my life for turning points. I mean, imagine, I'm 29 years old. I'm going to, when I do post-production, as I'll share an episode, I found a picture, one Polaroid shot from that, when I moved after that to California. I drove to California. It's me at the Grand Canyon. And if I think about myself, looking at myself back then, I had no idea where that was going to lead me on the journey at the time. I had no idea. And so, I mean, look what I'm doing today. So it's fascinating to think about. So you want to embrace those cycles of challenge. I embraced that unknowingly, but something was drawing me, something was pulling me, and that's the pattern you want to try and identify within yourself. That's probably pulling at you already, inviting you to step into that new alignment, that realignment to follow your passion, whatever that is. The third thing is, third principle here is to blend spiritual insight with practical action. So, I mean, let's not be all woo-woo about it. It's like, and I'm thinking about, I'm going to imagine and manifest that, and that's all I have to do. Maybe, but usually there's some inspired action that comes from that you actually have to make decisions. So for me, the first inspired action was go get my driver's license. I don't know what compelled me to do that. I visited the campus. I left and went back to my friends, and I was going to go back to Atlanta, Georgia, and not knowing what I was going to do and how I was going to do it from there. But I made a decision to go do that. Maybe the driving factor was I didn't want to pay out-of-state tuition. I was motivated by that, probably primarily, because I couldn't afford to pay out-of-state tuition. But that was a little naive because there was a lot more variables to this whole scenario in the first place, which I'll have to share in other stories. But the point is, you want to blend this spiritual insight that you have through your contemplation, meditation, and looking for those spiritual breadcrumbs and then actually taking the action, not second guessing that. And I didn't second guess it. I just made the decision to do that. Boom. And I was committed to that path. And I didn't even know how I was going to do it. Sometimes that's scary. So that's hard to do. A lot of people can't do that. So maybe you can't do that, but I think you can. In fact, you're probably ready for that. The last principle is what we call express your journey creatively. Well, we're talking about what I started writing after this, okay? And actually some years in there learning how to do Japanese sumi blanking painting. I'll share some of that in the future. Or any other creative outlet. So I'm never afraid to try and create and do things. And yeah, I remember as a boy, my grandmother in Florida, we'd go visit them, and my grandmother would take us out in nature and set up easels, and we'd do oil painting because, all my family did oil painting. I never really did that I never went to art school. I didn't do any of that, but I played around with that when I was a kid. But find something, and also for me, it was writing. Okay, I got into writing and journaling and expressing myself, and I was the scientist on this journey for a good portion of that, and I'd write science publications, scientific publications, very different kind of writing, obviously, but moving to this creative side of finding what that is for you, and that sort of thing. And one of the other creative things I like to do, which most people don't know about, is that I have engineering specs in an Excel spreadsheet I got through the internet some years back, and it was an engineer who developed this, and I looked for repurposing metal pipes, making wind chimes, and have them actually musically tuned harmonically to famous chimes like Westminster Abbey or that sort of thing. So all different sizes, and make those from scratch and involve some woodworking. I love woodworking. I did that. Don't have my workshop today that I used to have, so I don't have the ability or even the tools, because when I moved to Mexico, I sold all that stuff. At some point, I'll get back into that. But whatever it is and wherever you are, don't be afraid to jump into it. Express your journey creatively. So find that. That's the fourth principle, I would say, that you can apply in your own lives. So I'm going to leave you with some things to reflect on and questions to ask yourself. And we'll start with the first one, which is, what date or moment in your life might have been a hidden turning point? So as you're sitting with your contemplation and thinking about your journey to up to today, what date or moment in your life might have been a hidden turning point? You may not even have realized it, just like I didn't realize that until some years later, about 88 for me, until actually publishing the book. Okay. I mean, I knew it had some significance. It was kind of a cool coincidence, that the number, but again, there's no coincidences there. So everything happens for a reason. It's all divinely synchronized, whatever. Is that tied to the concept of a destiny or fate? I'm not so sure about that. I don't think we're programmed that somebody wrote the script for us and that's what we're supposed to do. No, I think we're the masters. We're the master artists. We're the ones that are going to create whatever it is for us. The second question is, what cycles or patterns keep showing up for you? So we talk about this merry-go-round. And as you're doing this contemplation, what cycles or patterns are jumping up for you that you keep reliving the same thing over and over again? And I did that in the restaurant business. I was moving from, different chains, and I was doing that. It was the same cycle. And so what patterns or cycles keep showing up for you? Think about that and contemplate that, because that'll help you identify those hidden moments and maybe even identify a place to get off the merry-go-round. So take a look at that. The last question is, how can you honor your own journey through creative or spiritual expression? And there are a lot of creative outlets that you can do that with: writing, as I said, art, all kinds of different artwork, woodworking, things like that. Things that are creative energy. By the way, this concept of right and left brain is not really true. We actually use all sides of our brain, whether we're doing something creative or scientific or whatever, analytical. And that's a fallacy, by the way. There's been recent research to show that when they map the brain when we're doing different activities, and guess what? Your whole brain is functioning when you're doing art or when you're actually doing quantum mechanics equations with calculus. Okay, it doesn't matter. It's doing the same thing. So there is no such thing as left and right brain, by the way. So I'm going to blow that myth out of the water here with the show. Anyway, maybe that's a good show to do in the future. But you want to look at how you can honor your own journey through some creative or spiritual expression. So whatever that is for you, maybe something you wanted to do, to go do it and reactivate that. Or you used to do it and you don't do it anymore. Anyway, that's up to you. Leave it to that. Love to hear from you guys on that. So let me wrap up our show today. And thank you for joining. Thank you for listening. And please go visit my website at drbillclark.life. And you'll see on the About page and the Ventures page, you'll see links you'll see the 4 books that are coming. There's 4 of them. And you'll see a link on Divine Whispers. You can click on that. I'll take you to Amazon. And you can purchase it there. It's on ebook and it's also in paperback. Actually, some folks that listen to the show at the trade show and that sort of thing that I'll be at Supply Side Global, I'll have some copies with me that I can sign, and you'll have a personal copy from me. So, or you can pick up your copy and I'll sign it for you. Anyway, so please go visit my website and check that out, and also leave a review. I'd love to hear from you about that, and in terms of what inspired you or resonated with you. And I encourage you to share your Power of 8 moments with me on social media. You can go to a website, follow me on everywhere, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and X. I'm on all the channels. You can share your stories there. I'd love to hear about that. So again, thank you for joining me today. My name is Dr. Bill. This is Beyond Limits, where Spirit Meets Science. And have a wonderful rest of your weekend and a great week coming up. Thank you. With love and gratitude.